The Black Hills of South Dakota rise from the surrounding Great Plains like an island of green in an ocean of grass. These ancient mountains, far older than the Rockies, far more weathered than the Sierra Nevada, have stood witness to over 1 billion years of Earth's history. To the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and other indigenous peoples, these are the sacred hills, Pahá Sápa in Lakota, the heart of everything that is, the place where the people emerged into this world, where vision quests reveal spiritual truths, and where the ancestors dwell. To geologists, the Black Hills are a remarkable geological formation, an uplifted dome of Precambrian granite surrounded by rings of progressively younger sedimentary rock, exposing some of the oldest stone on the North American continent. To tourists, they are the location of Mount Rushmore, the Crazy Horse Memorial, and countless attractions that draw millions of visitors annually to this corner of South Dakota and Wyoming. But to a certain subset of researchers, treasure hunters, and believers in hidden history, the Black Hills are something else entirely. The site of an ancient labyrinth, a vast network of tunnels and chambers carved deep beneath the mountains by unknown peoples in the distant past. According to these claims, the Black Hills conceal more than just the caves and natural passages known to modern speleologists. Beneath the familiar surface, supporters of this theory argue, lies a forgotten world, an underground complex that may have served as refuge, temple, mine, or city for civilizations that preceded the historical record. The stories are fragmentary and varied, drawn from diverse sources that sometimes contradict each other. Some accounts speak of natural cave systems that extend far deeper and more extensively than official surveys acknowledge. Others describe deliberately carved tunnels with smooth walls and precise alignments, suggesting engineering beyond what is typically attributed to pre-Columbian North American peoples. Still others claim that early settlers and miners encountered mysterious passages that were subsequently sealed, suppressed, or forgotten, their existence erased from the historical record by forces with interests in keeping the Black Hills' secrets hidden. These are extraordinary claims, and they require extraordinary evidence. As we will explore in depth throughout this investigation, the evidence offered for an ancient labyrinth beneath the Black Hills is, at best, ambiguous, and at worst, entirely absent. The geological structure of the region does contain caves and natural passages, but these are well-studied features that do not support claims of vast artificial tunnel networks. The historical record, when examined carefully, does not substantiate stories of mysterious underground discoveries. Indigenous traditions about the Black Hills, while acknowledging the sacred significance of caves and underground places, do not describe the elaborate labyrinths that modern legends suggest. Yet the legends persist, circulating in books about ancient mysteries, on websites dedicated to alternative history, and in the folklore of the region itself. They tap into deep human fascinations with hidden knowledge, lost civilizations, and the possibility that the familiar landscape conceals extraordinary secrets just beneath the surface. They draw spiritual seekers, treasure hunters, and curious tourists to the Black Hills in search of something more than scenic beauty and historical monuments. Before we examine the origins of these legends, the claims made about underground labyrinths, and the critical analysis that reveals their problems, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us investigate these historical mysteries with the thoroughness and critical perspective they deserve. Now let us journey beneath the Black Hills, not in search of imaginary labyrinths, but in pursuit of truth, examining what actually lies beneath these ancient mountains and why stories of forgotten tunnels have captured imaginations despite the absence of supporting evidence. To understand the claims about underground labyrinths, we must first understand the Black Hills as they actually exist, a unique geological formation with a complex history that spans over 1 billion years and creates conditions both favorable and unfavorable to the development of extensive cave systems. The Black Hills are not, strictly speaking, mountains in the sense of being part of a larger mountain range. They are an isolated, uplifted dome, a roughly oval geological structure approximately 125 miles long and 65 miles wide, straddling the border between southwestern South Dakota and northeastern Wyoming. The formation rises abruptly from the surrounding plains, with the highest point, Black Elk Peak, formerly known as Harney Peak, reaching 7,242 feet above sea level, making it the highest point in the United States east of the Rocky Mountains. The geological story of the Black Hills begins in the Precambrian era, over 18 billion years ago, when magma intruded into older metamorphic rocks, cooling slowly beneath the surface to form the granite core that now forms the central peaks of the hills. This ancient granite, among the oldest exposed rock in North America, was then buried under thousands of feet of sedimentary layers deposited over hundreds of millions of years, as shallow seas repeatedly covered and retreated from the region. The modern Black Hills were created by a period of uplift that began approximately 60 to 70 million years ago, during the Laramide orogeny, the same mountain-building event that created the Rocky Mountains. But unlike the Rockies, where layers of rock were folded and thrust upward, the Black Hills rose as a dome, with the ancient granite core pushing upward and the surrounding sedimentary layers bending up around it like the layers of an onion. Erosion over millions of years has since removed the overlying sedimentary rock from the center of the dome, exposing the ancient granite and creating the current topography. The result is a distinctive pattern visible from space and on geological maps, a central core of Precambrian granite and metamorphic rock, surrounded by concentric rings of progressively younger sedimentary formations, limestone, sandstone, and shale, that dip away from the center in all directions. This geological structure is crucial for understanding the potential for cave development in the Black Hills. The granite core, being igneous rock formed from cooled magma, does not typically develop extensive cave systems. Granite is too dense and non-soluble for the dissolution processes that create the spectacular cave systems found in limestone regions. While granite can develop some void spaces through cooling fractures or subsequent weathering, these are typically small and discontinuous, not the extensive networks described in Labyrinth legends. However, the sedimentary layers surrounding the granite core particularly the limestone formations, are highly favorable for cave development. Limestone is composed primarily of calcium carbonate, which is slowly dissolved by slightly acidic groundwater. Over geological time scales, this dissolution process creates caves, passages, and complex underground drainage systems. The Black Hills region does indeed contain significant limestone cave systems, the most famous being Wind Cave and Jewel Cave. Wind Cave, located in the southern Black Hills, is one of the longest and most complex cave systems in the world. It contains over 150 miles of mapped passages, making it the seventh longest cave system globally. Wind Cave is particularly notable for its boxwork formations, thin calcite fins that form a honeycomb pattern on walls and ceilings, which are rare in other caves worldwide. The cave is still being explored and mapped, with new passages discovered regularly, suggesting that the total extent is even greater than currently known. Jewel Cave, also in the southern Black Hills, is currently the third longest cave in the world, with over 200 miles of mapped passages. Like Wind Cave, Jewel Cave continues to be explored, and its total extent is believed to be much larger than the currently mapped portions. The cave is named for the calcite crystals that line many of its passages, creating a jeweled appearance when illuminated. The existence of these extensive natural cave systems is sometimes cited as evidence supporting the Labyrinth legends. If Wind Cave and Jewel Cave can extend for hundreds of miles, the argument goes, why not other undiscovered cave systems of equal or greater extent? This reasoning has some superficial appeal, but overlooks several critical points. First, Wind Cave and Jewel Cave are not hidden or suppressed discoveries. They are well-known, thoroughly studied, and managed as national monuments and parks. Their extent has been documented through decades of systematic exploration by cave surveyors and speleologists. The passages are natural formations following dissolution patterns in limestone, not artificial tunnels with the characteristics described in Labyrinth legends. Second, the geological conditions that favor cave development in limestone are well understood. Caves form in specific types of limestone under specific hydrological conditions. Geologists can predict with reasonable accuracy where caves are likely to exist based on the surface and subsurface geology. The major cave systems in the Black Hills are located in areas where the geology favors their development. The claim of vast, undiscovered cave systems in areas where the geology does not support such development contradicts established geological understanding. Third, the extensive mapping of Wind Cave and Jewel Cave has been accomplished through the dedicated work of cave explorers who crawl through tight passages, dive through water-filled sections, and systematically document every passage. This process is slow, difficult, and ongoing, but it is also transparent and scientifically rigorous. If other cave systems of comparable extent existed and were being explored, the evidence would appear in speleological literature and surveys. The absence of such documentation for the supposed ancient labyrinth is telling. The Black Hills also contain other types of underground features besides dissolution caves. Abandoned mines from the Gold Rush-era honeycomb portions of the hills, particularly around Deadwood, Lade, and other historic mining towns. The Homestake mine in Lead was once the largest and deepest gold mine in North America, with shafts extending over 8,000 feet below the surface and hundreds of miles of tunnels and drifts. These mine workings are entirely human-made and date to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, not to ancient times. Some confusion between ancient labyrinths and historic mine workings is understandable. An abandoned mine tunnel could, to someone unfamiliar with mining history, seem mysterious and ancient. But mine workings are documented in company records, geological surveys, and mining maps. Their locations, extents, and histories are known and accessible to researchers. They are not forgotten labyrinths, but well-documented industrial archaeology. The Black Hills geological structure does create some natural features that might seem mysterious to casual observers. Tailless caves formed by fallen boulders, creating void spaces, shallow rock shelters in canyon walls, and small fracture caves in various rock types all exist throughout the hills. These features were used by indigenous peoples for shelter and ceremony, and by early settlers for various purposes. But they are small, localized features, not components of vast underground networks. Understanding the actual geology of the Black Hills, the types of rock present, the processes that create caves, and the well-documented cave systems that do exist, provides essential context for evaluating claims about forgotten labyrinths. The geology supports the existence of significant cave systems in limestone formations, and these caves are indeed extensive and impressive. But the geology does not support claims of vast artificial tunnel networks carved through granite, or of undiscovered natural caves extending throughout the entire Black Hills region. Long before any legends of ancient labyrinths arose, long before European contact, and long before the modern controversies over underground mysteries, the Black Hills held profound sacred significance for the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains. Understanding these genuine traditions is essential both for respecting the actual cultural heritage of the region and for seeing how indigenous spiritual concepts have sometimes been misappropriated or misunderstood in the creation of modern legends. The Lakota people, whose territory has included the Black Hills for centuries, call them Pahá Sápa, which translates as the Sacred Hills or Black Hills. This name refers both to the appearance of the pine-covered mountains, which look dark from a distance against the lighter grasslands, and to their spiritual significance. The Cheyenne people, who also have historical and spiritual connections to the region, call the hills M-O glottal stop letter 22F, HTRVO glottal stop, HONR-A-EV, meaning the Black Mountains. For the Lakota, the Black Hills are the center of the world, the axis mundi where the physical and spiritual realms intersect. Lakota creation traditions describe the emergence of the people from within the earth in the Black Hills, making this landscape the literal birthplace of the nation. The hills are understood as a living, breathing entity, often described as the heart of Mother Earth, with springs and streams as arteries carrying life-giving water to the surrounding plains. Specific locations within and around the Black Hills hold particular spiritual significance. Bear Butte, a volcanic laccolith on the northeastern edge of the hills, is among the most sacred sites, used for vision quests and ceremony by multiple Plains nations. The hot springs in what is now Hot Springs, South Dakota, were considered healing waters with spiritual power. Certain caves and rock formations are understood as sacred places requiring respect and proper protocol. The Lakota spiritual relationship with caves and underground places is complex and does not align neatly with the modern labyrinth legends. Caves are recognized as powerful liminal spaces, thresholds between the surface world and the subterranean realms, between the ordinary and the sacred. Some caves are appropriate for vision quests, where individuals seek spiritual guidance through fasting, prayer, and isolation. Other caves are understood as dwelling places of powerful spirits and are approached with caution and respect, if entered at all. Wind Cave holds particular significance in Lakota tradition. One version of the emergence story describes the Lakota people emerging from within the earth through Wind Cave, passing from the subterranean world of their origin into the surface world they would inhabit. The cave is thus understood as the birthplace of the people, the womb of the earth from which the Lakota came into being. This sacred understanding of Wind Cave is fundamentally different from treating it as evidence of ancient labyrinths or forgotten civilizations. The Lakota tradition honors the cave as it is, a natural formation, a sacred place, a connection to origin and to the spiritual dimension of existence. It does not require the cave to have been carved by ancient peoples or to contain hidden chambers beyond what naturally exists. It is crucial to understand that genuine Lakota traditions about the Black Hills do not include stories of ancient labyrinths, forgotten tunnel builders, or lost civilizations. These are modern inventions, not indigenous knowledge. When proponents of labyrinth legends claim they are based on Native American traditions, they are either misunderstanding indigenous spiritual concepts or deliberately misrepresenting them. Some indigenous traditions do speak of beings or presences associated with underground places, but these are understood as spiritual entities, not as physical civilizations living in carved tunnels. The distinction between spiritual beings in indigenous cosmology and the literal underground cities described in modern legends is profound and important. Moreover, the Black Hills remain at the center of ongoing struggles for indigenous rights and sovereignty. The Lakota never sold the Black Hills, but had them seized in violation of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, when gold was discovered in the region in the 1870s. The theft of the Black Hills, the forced removal of indigenous peoples, and the subsequent desecration of sacred sites, including the carving of Mount Rushmore into the face of the sacred Six Grandfathers Mountain, remain open wounds and active injustices. The United States Supreme Court ruled in 1980 that the seizure of the Black Hills was illegal and awarded financial compensation. But the Lakota have refused the money, insisting that the land itself must be returned. The struggle for the return of the Black Hills continues to this day, making the region not just a site of spiritual significance, but also a focal point for indigenous sovereignty and justice. In this context, modern legends about ancient labyrinths can be seen as another form of erasure and appropriation. By focusing attention on imaginary ancient tunnel builders, these legends divert attention from the actual indigenous peoples who have sacred relationships with the Black Hills, who have been dispossessed of their land, and who continue to fight for justice. The legends implicitly suggest that the real mysteries of the Black Hills lie in hypothetical ancient civilizations rather than in the living traditions and ongoing struggles of indigenous peoples. Respectful engagement with the Black Hills requires centering Lakota and Cheyenne voices and perspectives, honoring their actual traditions rather than invented alternatives, supporting their sovereignty and land rights, and recognizing that the sacred significance of the hills is grounded in real indigenous history and spirituality, not in fabricated stories about forgotten labyrinths. The modern history of European and American interaction with the Black Hills begins in earnest in the mid-19th century, when explorers, military expeditions, and eventually gold seekers penetrated the region despite its designation as Lakota territory under the Fort Laramie Treaty. This period of exploration, conflict, and rapid settlement provides the historical context in which some of the earliest claims about mysterious underground features emerged. The first documented Euro-American expedition into the Black Hills was led by Jedediah Smith in 1823, though earlier French trappers may have entered the region. Throughout the early and mid-19th century, sporadic expeditions explored the hills, producing reports that emphasized the region's natural resources, dramatic scenery, and potential for settlement. The decisive moment came in 1874 when Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led a military expedition of over 1,000 men into the Black Hills, ostensibly to scout locations for a military fort, but actually to investigate rumors of gold. The expedition's geologists confirmed the presence of gold, and although Custer's report was supposed to be confidential, the news leaked and triggered a gold rush that would transform the region and doom Lakota control of their sacred land. By 1876, thousands of miners and settlers had flooded into the Black Hills in violation of the treaty, establishing towns like Deadwood, Lade, and Custer. The U.S. government made minimal efforts to prevent this invasion and eventually seized the Black Hills in clear violation of the treaty, setting off the Great Sioux War of 1876–1877, which included the Battle of the Little Bighorn, where Custer and his immediate command were killed. The Gold Rush era brought intensive mining to the Black Hills, with prospectors and mining companies excavating thousands of shafts, tunnels, and drifts in search of gold and other minerals. The Homestake Mine, established in 1876, became one of the largest gold mines in the Western Hemisphere and operated until 2002, ultimately producing over 40 million ounces of gold from a warren of tunnels extending over 8,000 feet deep and covering an area of several square miles. It is in the context of this intensive mining activity that some of the earliest claims about discovering mysterious pre-existing tunnels arose. Several 19th century sources contain accounts of miners breaking into what appeared to be older workings, passages that did not match the characteristics of natural caves or recent mining activity. These accounts are fragmentary, typically appearing in local newspapers, miners' memoirs, or folklore collections, and they share certain features. The discovered passages were described as too regular to be natural, showing evidence of tool work on the walls and containing artifacts or features that suggested great age. One oft-repeated account describes miners near Deadwood in the late 1870s breaking through a rock face into a passage that extended beyond the reach of their lamps, with smooth walls and a level floor. According to the story, the miners explored the passage for several hundred feet before retreating due to poor air quality, and when they returned with the mine superintendent to investigate further, they found that a collapse had sealed the entrance, making further exploration impossible. Another account from the 1880s describes the discovery of stone carvings or petroglyphs in a cave near Custer, depicting figures and symbols that the finders claimed were unlike any known Native American rock art. The carvings were supposedly documented by a local teacher before the cave entrance was sealed by a rockfall, and the documentation was lost in a subsequent fire that destroyed the teacher's house. These and similar accounts share problematic features that are characteristic of unverifiable folklore rather than documented historical events. They typically lack specific details that would allow verification, no precise locations, no names of witnesses that can be corroborated, no physical evidence preserved. The discoveries are invariably lost due to convenient catastrophes, collapses, fires, deliberate sealing that prevent subsequent investigation. The accounts appear in sources of uncertain reliability and are repeated and embellished with each retelling. When historians and archaeologists have attempted to trace these stories to their origins, they typically dissolve into vagueness. The mine where the discovery supposedly occurred cannot be identified with certainty. The witnesses either cannot be found in historical records, or, if found, left no documentation of the claimed discovery in their own papers or accounts. The stories appear to be what folklorists call friend of a friend tales, stories that are always reported second-hand or third-hand, with the actual witness always 1 degree removed from the teller. This is not to say that miners never encountered natural caves while excavating. The Black Hills' complex geology means that mining operations occasionally did intersect with natural voids, including caves and fracture systems. But these natural features are readily explained by geology and do not require the existence of ancient artificial tunnels. There is also the question of motivation for fabricating or embellishing such stories. The Gold Rush era was a time of intense speculation, claim jumping, and efforts to attract investment to marginal mining operations. A story about discovering mysterious ancient tunnels could serve various purposes: generating publicity for a mining claim, attracting investors with the promise of hidden treasure, or simply providing entertainment in the rough mining camps where tall tales were a form of recreation. The historical record from the Gold Rush era, when examined critically, does not support claims of discovering ancient labyrinths beneath the Black Hills. What it does show is a period of intensive industrial activity that created thousands of miles of human-made passages. The mine workings themselves, and that occasionally intersected with natural geological features. The mystery tunnels described in folklore are most parsimoniously explained as either natural caves, misidentified by observers unfamiliar with cave geology, exaggerations of ordinary mine workings, or pure fabrication. The contemporary legends of forgotten labyrinths beneath the Black Hills do not emerge directly from 19th century mining folklore, but rather represent a later synthesis of various elements. Fragmentary historical accounts, indigenous spiritual concepts, imperfectly understood by outsiders, natural cave systems like Wind Cave and Jewel Cave, and broader cultural fascinations with lost civilizations and hidden knowledge. The legends appear to have crystallized in their current form primarily in the latter half of the 20th century, particularly from the 1970s onward, when popular interest in ancient mysteries, alternative archaeology, and Native American spirituality grew significantly. Several factors contributed to the development and spread of the labyrinth legends during this period. First, the extensive exploration and mapping of Wind Cave and Jewel Cave in the mid-20th century revealed the extraordinary extent of these natural systems, hundreds of miles of passages, far more extensive than surface observations would suggest. This genuine geological marvel provided a factual foundation on which more speculative claims could be built. If these known caves were so extensive, the reasoning went, might there not be other, undiscovered systems of equal or greater extent? Second, the growing environmental and New Age movements of the 1960s and 1970s brought increased interest in Native American spirituality, often filtered through non-indigenous interpreters who imperfectly understood or deliberately distorted indigenous traditions. The Lakota concept of emerging from within the earth through Wind Cave was reinterpreted by some non-indigenous writers as evidence of extensive underground habitation, rather than as the spiritual metaphor it was intended to be. Third, the broader ancient astronaut and lost civilization movements, popularized by books like Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods and similar works, created cultural appetite for stories of ancient mysteries and hidden knowledge. The Black Hills, with their dramatic landscape, sacred indigenous associations, and known cave systems, became an attractive location for projecting these narratives. Fourth, local economic interests in attracting tourism to the Black Hills beyond the established attractions of Mount Rushmore and the Badlands created incentives for developing new stories and mysteries. Ancient labyrinths and lost civilizations make for compelling marketing, drawing curious visitors who might otherwise bypass the region. The specific content of the modern labyrinth legends varies depending on the source, but common elements include claims that the cave systems of the Black Hills are far more extensive than officially acknowledged, that they contain evidence of ancient occupation or construction, that certain passages or chambers have been deliberately sealed by authorities to prevent public access, and that the government or scientific establishment is suppressing knowledge of these discoveries for various nefarious reasons. Some versions of the legend specifically invoke ancient advanced civilizations, sometimes vaguely described as the ancients, sometimes identified with specific groups like survivors of Atlantis or Lemuria, sometimes connected to ancient astronaut theories. These versions typically claim that the tunnels show engineering sophistication beyond what is attributed to indigenous peoples, implying that outside influences or lost civilizations were responsible for their construction. Other versions focus more on natural caves, but claim that their full extent is being hidden from the public. They suggest that Wind Cave and Jewel Cave are merely the publicly accessible portions of much larger systems, that connections between caves that would reveal a vast network are known to authorities but not disclosed, and that further exploration is being actively prevented. Still, other versions emphasize treasure and lost mines, claiming that Spanish explorers or other groups hid gold or other valuables in the Black Hills caves, and that the locations have been lost or suppressed. These treasure legends draw on the region's real mining history, but add layers of mystery and conspiracy that are not supported by historical evidence. What all these versions share is a narrative structure that is essentially unfalsifiable. Evidence that would definitively prove the labyrinths do not exist cannot be produced, because one can never prove a negative, especially about underground features in a large and geologically complex region. Meanwhile, the absence of evidence for the labyrinths is explained away through claims of suppression, conspiracy, or simply incomplete exploration. To properly evaluate the Black Hills Labyrinth legends, we must first understand precisely what is being claimed. The allegations about underground passages are not monolithic, but consist of multiple overlapping and sometimes contradictory claims from various sources. Examining these claims in detail reveals both their appeal and their problems. The most conservative version of the labyrinth claim suggests that Wind Cave and Jewel Cave are far more extensive than publicly acknowledged. Proponents of this version note that both caves are still being actively explored and that new passages are discovered regularly, suggesting that vast portions remain unmapped. They argue that cave explorers have discovered connections between these two caves, which would mean they are actually parts of a single enormous system, but that this discovery is being kept secret for reasons ranging from environmental protection to more sinister motivations involving hidden treasures or evidence of ancient occupation. This claim has some superficial plausibility because Wind Cave and Jewel Cave are indeed still being explored, and their full extent is genuinely unknown. However, the claim becomes problematic when it suggests deliberate suppression of discoveries. Wind Cave and Jewel Cave are separated by approximately 30 miles of intervening geology. While it is theoretically possible that cave passages could extend that far, and while hydrological studies do suggest potential connections between various cave systems in the Black Hills, no explorer has documented a traversable passage connecting the two caves. The exploration of these caves is conducted primarily by volunteers working with the National Park Service, not by government agents with interests in concealment. Cave survey data is published in speleological journals and is accessible to researchers. The suggestion that discoveries are being suppressed requires us to believe that hundreds of independent cave explorers over decades of exploration have all maintained perfect secrecy about connections they have discovered. This strains credibility. A more elaborate version of the legend claims that beneath the Black Hills exists an entirely separate system of passages, not natural caves, but artificially constructed tunnels carved by ancient peoples. These tunnels are described in some accounts as having specific characteristics that distinguish them from natural caves. Uniform dimensions maintained over long distances, smooth walls showing evidence of tool work, precise orientations suggesting astronomical or cardinal alignments, and constructed features like carved pillars or chambers with specialized purposes. The alleged purpose of these artificial tunnels varies between accounts. Some suggest they were mines, created by ancient peoples to extract minerals including gold, copper, or more exotic materials. Others propose they were habitations, underground cities where ancient peoples lived either temporarily or permanently. Still others claim ceremonial purposes, describing the tunnels as vast temple complexes used for rituals and vision quests. Some versions combine multiple purposes, describing a complex of mining, habitation, and ceremonial areas. When specific locations for tunnel entrances are provided, they tend to fall into certain patterns. Entrances are most commonly claimed to exist in remote and difficult-to-access areas, on steep hillsides, in dense forest, or in areas now within restricted zones, such as military installations. This geographical pattern is convenient for believers because it explains why the entrances have not been rediscovered. They are simply too remote or too restricted for casual investigators to reach. Some accounts claim tunnel entrances near or even within the boundaries of Wind Cave or Jewel Cave National Parks, suggesting that passages accessible through these known caves lead to the larger Labyrinth system, but that these connections are blocked or concealed by park authorities. Other accounts place entrances in areas associated with mining claims, suggesting that miners discovered the tunnels, but that the discoveries were subsequently covered up by mining companies or government agencies. A particularly elaborate subset of claims involves connections to surface features. Some versions of the legend assert that certain rock formations, springs, or other topographical features mark tunnel entrances or ventilation shafts. These features are sometimes identified through alleged correlations with astronomical alignments, with geometric patterns supposedly visible only from aerial or satellite imagery, or through claimed correlations with indigenous sacred sites. The astronomical alignment claims typically suggest that tunnel entrances or internal features align with solar or lunar phenomena, solstice sunrises, equinox positions, or lunar standstills. These alignments are proposed as evidence both of the tunnel's ancient origin and of the astronomical knowledge of their builders. However, when investigated, these alignment claims typically prove to be either coincidental, the result of retrofitting explanations to random features, or simply false. Another category of claims involves artifacts allegedly discovered in the tunnels. These accounts describe objects ranging from the mundane to the extraordinary. Stone tools that supposedly differ from known indigenous artifact types, metal objects that allegedly predate European contact, inscriptions or carvings in unknown scripts, and in the most sensational versions, artifacts suggesting advanced ancient technology or even extraterrestrial origin. The problem with all these artifact claims is that none of the artifacts are available for examination. Like the tunnels themselves, the artifacts are always just beyond reach, lost, destroyed, confiscated by authorities, or held in private collections whose owners refuse to allow scientific examination. This pattern is characteristic of pseudo-archaeological claims generally. The evidence always exists just off-stage, tantalizingly described, but never produced for verification. Some versions of the legend incorporate elements from other alternative history narratives. The tunnels are sometimes connected to the hollow earth theory, becoming part of a supposed global network of passages leading to a habitable inner Earth. They are linked to ancient astronaut theories, with claims that the tunnels were created by or for extraterrestrial visitors who used the Black Hills as a base. They are associated with lost continents like Atlantis or Lemuria, with refugees from these cataclysms supposedly settling in the Black Hills and carving the tunnels for refuge or resource extraction. These more elaborate versions of the legend typically appear in books and websites dedicated to ancient mysteries and alternative archaeology rather than in local South Dakota sources. They represent the incorporation of the Black Hills into broader alternative history frameworks that posit vast hidden histories of advanced ancient civilizations, extraterrestrial intervention, and global conspiracies to suppress evidence of these realities. Finally, there is a category of claims involving modern encounters with the tunnels or their inhabitants. These accounts describe individuals who allegedly stumbled upon tunnel entrances while hiking or hunting, who explored portions of the system before becoming lost or frightened and retreating, or who witnessed strange phenomena associated with the tunnels, such as unusual lights, sounds, or electromagnetic effects. Some of these encounter stories have an urban legend quality complete, with elements designed to prevent verification. The witness who found an entrance but can no longer locate it, the group of explorers who penetrated deep into the tunnels, but whose camera malfunctioned so no photographs survived. The elderly resident who knew the location of an entrance but died before revealing it. Other encounter stories have a more modern paranormal flavor, describing experiences that might be classified as UFO sightings, cryptid encounters, or interdimensional phenomena rather than simply discoveries of ancient tunnels. What becomes clear when examining these various claims is that there is no single coherent Black Hills Labyrinth legend, but rather a collection of loosely related stories, theories, and assertions that share common themes but differ significantly in details, alleged evidence, and implications. This fragmentation is itself revealing, suggesting that we are dealing not with a unified mystery supported by converging lines of evidence, but with a folklore complex that has grown through accretion, embellishment, and the incorporation of various cultural influences. Given the persistence of labyrinth legends and the interest they generate, various individuals and groups have attempted to investigate the claims and locate physical evidence of the alleged tunnel systems. Examining these investigative efforts and their results provides important insight into the evidentiary status of the legends. The most systematic investigations have been conducted not by treasure hunters or alternative archaeology enthusiasts, but by professional speleologists engaged in the ongoing exploration and mapping of the known cave systems. The exploration of Wind Cave has been particularly intensive, with volunteers associated with the Wind Cave National Park logging thousands of hours crawling through passages, documenting intersections and features, and gradually extending the map of the system. This exploration is painstaking work, often involving crawling through tight squeezes, wading or diving through water-filled passages, and carefully surveying each new section. The explorers keep detailed records, take photographs, and maintain rigorous documentation standards. If these explorers were encountering passages with the characteristics described in Labyrinth legends, uniform artificial construction, tool marks, carved features, such discoveries would be documented and would appear in the published cave survey data. The fact that decades of systematic exploration of Wind Cave and Jewel Cave have not produced evidence of artificial construction, ancient occupation beyond what is consistent with known indigenous use of cave entrances, or anomalous features suggesting lost civilizations, is significant. The absence of such findings in the course of thorough, well-documented exploration of hundreds of miles of passages is strong evidence that the Labyrinth legends do not describe reality. Some Labyrinth proponents argue that the artificial passages exist in portions of the cave systems that have not yet been explored, or that they branch off from the known systems in ways that cave explorers have not yet discovered. This is an unfalsifiable claim. One can always assert that evidence exists in unexplored areas, but it becomes less plausible as exploration continues and the proportion of the systems that has been mapped increases without producing the claimed features. Outside the systematic cave exploration community, various individuals have attempted to locate tunnel entrances based on Labyrinth legends. These efforts have typically been far less rigorous than professional speleological work and have not produced verified discoveries. Many such investigations are conducted by treasure hunters motivated by legends of hidden gold or artifacts, by amateur archaeologists interested in alternative history, or by spiritual seekers attracted to the mystique of ancient labyrinths. The typical pattern of these amateur investigations involves using historical accounts, local folklore, or even psychic impressions to identify likely locations for tunnel entrances, then conducting surface searches of these areas looking for cave openings, depressions suggesting collapsed tunnels, or other features that might mark access points. When openings are found, and in the Black Hills complex terrain, small caves and rock shelters are not uncommon. They are explored to varying depths, depending on the investigator's equipment and experience. These explorations occasionally produce excited reports of discoveries. A cave that extends farther than expected, a passage with unusual features, or an artifact of uncertain origin. But when these discoveries are examined critically, they invariably prove to be either natural features, misidentified by inexperienced observers, or ordinary artifacts from known historical periods, misunderstood as ancient or anomalous. For example, a group in the 1980s reported discovering a tunnel entrance in a remote area of the Black Hills that led to a passage with suspiciously smooth walls, suggesting artificial construction. When professional speleologists visited the site, they identified it as a natural fracture cave with walls smoothed by water action, a common feature in the region's geology. The mysterious symbols the original explorers reported seeing on the walls proved to be natural mineral staining patterns and scratches from animal claws, not ancient inscriptions. Another investigation in the 1990s claimed to have located a sealed tunnel entrance based on ground-penetrating radar surveys that revealed a void beneath the surface. Excavation of the site revealed not an ancient tunnel, but an old mine adit from the Gold Rush era that had been filled in when the mine was abandoned. Historical research easily identified the mine in old mining company records. These examples illustrate a common pattern. Features that seem mysterious to enthusiastic amateurs are readily explained by experts with appropriate knowledge of geology, archaeology, or regional history. The mystery dissolves not through conspiracy or cover-up, but through the application of relevant expertise to evaluate claims critically. Some investigations have been conducted with more sophisticated technology. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and other geophysical survey techniques have been employed in attempts to detect underground voids or anomalies that might indicate tunnels. These surveys have occasionally detected subsurface features, but in every verified case, the features have proven to be either natural geological structures or historical mine workings, not ancient artificial tunnels. The interpretation of geophysical survey data requires expertise, and one problem with some amateur investigations is that the interpreters lack the training to distinguish between artifacts of the survey technique itself, natural geological features, and genuinely anomalous structures. A radar signature that looks to an untrained observer like an artificial passage might actually represent a natural fracture system, a layer boundary between different rock types, or even an artifact caused by ground moisture or survey equipment issues. When amateur investigators have claimed to detect tunnel systems through remote sensing, their interpretations have typically not been confirmed by subsequent physical investigation or by review by qualified geophysicists. The radar signature that was interpreted as a vast underground chamber proves, when excavated, to be a natural cavity in the bedrock. The magnetic anomaly that was thought to indicate an ancient metal artifact is found to be caused by a modern piece of discarded mining equipment. A particular challenge for verification is that some of the most specific labyrinth claims involve locations that are not accessible to independent investigators. Some alleged tunnel entrances are claimed to be on private property whose owners deny access, in wilderness areas where excavation is legally prohibited, or within military restricted zones where civilian access is forbidden. This inaccessibility is sometimes presented as evidence of suppression. Authorities are deliberately preventing investigation of sites that would prove the legends true. But the more parsimonious explanation is that specific locations are cited precisely because they are inaccessible, ensuring that claims about them cannot be easily disproven. It is a common tactic in pseudo-archaeology and conspiracy theories to make claims about evidence in places where independent verification is difficult or impossible. The overall picture that emerges from decades of investigation is clear. Despite the interest in Labyrinth legends, and despite numerous attempts to locate and verify the alleged tunnels, no credible physical evidence of an ancient artificial tunnel system beneath the Black Hills has been produced. The known cave systems, while extensive and impressive, are natural formations. Historical mine workings are well documented and not ancient. Claimed discoveries by amateur investigators have not withstood critical examination. This absence of evidence, in the context of active searching by believers and thorough exploration by professional speleologists, is powerful evidence that the Labyrinth legends do not describe a real phenomenon, but rather represent folklore, wishful thinking, and the misidentification of natural features. One factor that has sustained interest in the Black Hills Labyrinth legends is the connection to treasure hunting. The possibility that ancient tunnels might contain gold, artifacts, or other valuables has attracted individuals and groups willing to invest considerable time and resources in searches, despite the lack of supporting evidence. The treasure hunting dimension draws on several sources. The Black Hills' real history of gold mining provides a factual foundation. Gold does exist in the region. Fortunes were made during the gold rush, and some mining claims were worked only partially before being abandoned. This creates plausible scenarios for lost mines or hidden caches that, while not ancient, might still contain valuable ore or artifacts. Overlaid on this real history are layers of legend. Spanish explorers supposedly penetrated the region in the 16th or 17th centuries, before documented European contact, and either mined gold or discovered existing native mines, then concealed the locations before departing or dying. The infamous treasure of the 7 cities of Cibola, a persistent legend of the American Southwest, is sometimes relocated to the Black Hills in these accounts. Jesuit priests are alleged to have operated secret mines in the region and hidden the gold when their order was suppressed. None of these treasure legends has any solid historical foundation. Spanish exploration of the region that became South Dakota is well documented, and there is no evidence of 16th or 17th century Spanish mining operations in the Black Hills. The 7 cities of Cibola legend, which originally referred to supposed golden cities in what is now New Mexico and Arizona, is itself a myth, a misunderstanding of indigenous Pueblo towns that contained no gold. The stories of Jesuit treasure are similarly unsupported by historical evidence. Yet these legends persist because they tap into powerful motivations. The promise of hidden treasure offers the possibility of sudden wealth, of being the one who finally solves an old mystery and claims the prize. For some, treasure hunting is primarily a hobby or adventure, a reason to explore the outdoors and engage in amateur historical research. For others, it represents a genuine belief that fortune is waiting to be found, motivating serious investment of time and money in searches. The connection to the Labyrinth legends is straightforward. If ancient tunnels exist, they might contain treasures either left by their builders or hidden by later groups who used the passages. This creates incentive to search for the tunnels, even for those who are agnostic about their age or origin. Whether the passages were carved by lost civilizations or are simply old mine workings, they might still contain something valuable. This treasure hunting interest has had several effects on the evolution and persistence of the Labyrinth legends. It ensures a steady stream of people actively searching for tunnel entrances, which generates new claim discoveries and keeps the legends circulating. It creates economic incentive for those who sell books, maps, or guiding services related to the treasure hunt. And it sometimes leads to destructive behavior, with would-be treasure hunters digging holes, disturbing archaeological sites, or damaging natural features in their searches. From a legal and ethical standpoint, treasure hunting in the Black Hills is problematic. Much of the land is federally owned, either as national forest or national park land, where digging or removing artifacts without permits is illegal. Other areas are on Lakota Treaty territory, where such activities without tribal permission constitute trespass and theft. Even on private land, disturbing archaeological sites violates federal and state laws protecting cultural resources. Despite these legal restrictions, illicit treasure hunting continues, often justified by treasure hunters as harmless hobby activity or even as a form of historical research. But the damage can be significant. Archaeological sites that might provide genuine information about the region's history are disturbed or destroyed when treasure hunters dig without proper methodology or documentation. Natural features are damaged, and in rare cases, treasure hunters have injured themselves exploring unstable caves or abandoned mine workings, requiring expensive rescue operations. The National Park Service and Forest Service personnel report ongoing problems with illegal digging in areas associated with treasure legends. Signs of such activity, holes, disturbed soil, metal detector scans, appear regularly in areas rumored to contain tunnel entrances or hidden caches. Most of these searches find nothing because there is nothing to find, but the damage to the landscape and cultural resources is real and permanent. The Black Hills Labyrinth legends do not exist in isolation, but are part of a broader pattern of claims about hidden tunnels, lost civilizations, and suppressed discoveries that appear across North America and indeed worldwide. Understanding this pattern helps contextualize the specific Black Hills claims and reveals recurring themes that characterize this genre of alternative archaeology. Similar legends attach to numerous other locations in the United States. The Superstition Mountains of Arizona are alleged to contain not only the famous Lost Dutchman's gold mine, but also ancient tunnels supposedly created by Spanish miners or even Precambrian civilizations. The Ozark Mountains of Missouri and Arkansas have their own legends of ancient passages, which we have explored in detail previously. The Grand Canyon, as we have also examined, is the supposed site of an Egyptian-style underground city, according to a 1909 newspaper hoax that some continue to believe. The Cascade Range has legends of tunnels associated with Mount Shasta and other peaks. These various claims share common features. They typically involve remote, mountainous regions with complex geology that includes natural caves or historical mining. They draw on fragmentary historical accounts, often from the 19th century, that are ambiguous enough to be reinterpreted as describing ancient mysteries. They incorporate elements from indigenous traditions while misunderstanding or distorting the actual cultural context of those traditions. They propose purposes for the tunnels that align with broader alternative history narratives about lost advanced civilizations or ancient aliens. The pattern extends internationally. Legends of ancient tunnel systems appear in the Andes Mountains, where they are sometimes connected to Incan civilization or to pre-Incan cultures. Various locations in Asia, from the Himalayas to Turkey, have legends of underground cities or passage networks, some with genuine archaeological basis, like Dirinkuyu in Cappadocia, others purely mythical. Europe has its own traditions of underground passages, from the Erdstall of Bavaria to legends associated with prehistoric sites like Stonehenge or Karnak. What these diverse legends share is a narrative structure that positions mainstream archaeology and conventional history as incomplete or deliberately suppressive, that offers believers access to hidden knowledge, and that transforms ordinary landscapes into sites of mystery and potential revelation. The legends serve psychological and social functions that have little to do with their factual accuracy. They provide meaning and excitement, they create communities of believers, and they offer the appeal of being an insider who knows what the authorities deny or cannot see. The Black Hills legends specifically draw on several broader alternative archaeology themes. The idea of ancient advanced civilizations in the Americas challenges what believers characterize as Eurocentric archaeology that refuses to acknowledge indigenous technological sophistication. This framing positions the Labyrinth claims as part of a larger effort to reveal suppressed indigenous achievement, though in reality, the claims often diminish actual indigenous history by attributing impressive features to hypothetical lost civilizations rather than to the ancestors of contemporary native peoples. The suppression narrative is central to maintaining belief despite absent evidence. If credible evidence for ancient labyrinths is not available, this is explained not by the labyrinth's non-existence, but by deliberate concealment by government agencies, academic institutions, or shadowy elites. This conspiracy framing makes the claims unfalsifiable. Any absence of evidence becomes evidence of cover-up rather than evidence of absence. The treasure element taps into deeply rooted cultural narratives about hidden wealth and the possibility of sudden fortune through discovery. The spiritual dimension, often involving claims about energy vortexes or sacred geometry, associated with tunnel locations, connects to New Age beliefs and creates alternative motivations for belief beyond the historical or archaeological claims. Understanding these broader patterns helps explain why the Black Hills legends persist despite lack of evidence. The legends are not primarily about the actual geology or history of the Black Hills, but about the psychological and cultural needs they serve. They are modern mythology, drawing on but not constrained by historical fact, evolving to incorporate new cultural preoccupations and to serve the needs of successive generations of believers. The perspectives of indigenous peoples, particularly the Lakota, on the Labyrinth legends and the investigations they inspire are crucial, but too often ignored in discussions of the mystery. The Lakota relationship with the Black Hills is not one of curiosity about possible hidden tunnels, but of ongoing spiritual practice, cultural connection, and political struggle for the return of stolen land. From a Lakota perspective, the Labyrinth legends represent several forms of harm and disrespect. First, they appropriate and distort indigenous spiritual traditions. The sacred understanding of places like Wind Cave as the emergence point of the people is misrepresented as evidence of ancient habitation in literal underground cities. The spiritual concept of the underground as a realm of origin and power is materialized into claims about physical tunnels carved by lost civilizations. This appropriation erases or marginalizes genuine Lakota traditions in favor of invented alternatives that non-indigenous people find more exciting or more compatible with their own cultural frameworks. When tourists come to the Black Hills seeking ancient labyrinths supposedly connected to lost civilizations, they are less interested in learning about actual Lakota history and spiritual traditions, which are dismissed as less mysterious or less significant than the imagined ancient cultures. Second, the treasure hunting and amateur archaeological investigation motivated by the Labyrinth legends cause physical damage to sites that are sacred to the Lakota. Illegal digging disturbs burial sites, ceremonial areas, and other culturally significant locations. Even legal investigation that follows permitting processes often occurs without meaningful Lakota consultation or consent, treating the Black Hills as a puzzle to be solved rather than as a living sacred landscape that is not ours to excavate. Third, the Labyrinth legends and the alternative history narratives they connect to often implicitly or explicitly deny Lakota presence and achievement. By attributing impressive features to lost civilizations, ancient astronauts, or other sources, these narratives suggest that the indigenous peoples who were present when Europeans arrived were not responsible for sophisticated works. While the Labyrinth legends do not usually explicitly make this claim, indeed, some versions do attribute the tunnels to ancestors of contemporary tribes. The overall effect is to shift focus away from actual indigenous history toward imagined alternatives. Fourth, the ongoing fascination with Black Hills mysteries, whether labyrinths or treasure, treats the region primarily as a location for adventure, discovery, and potentially profit, rather than as Lakota homeland and sacred territory that was stolen in violation of treaties and that should be returned. The perspective that sees the Black Hills primarily as a puzzle, a treasure location, or a site of ancient mysteries is fundamentally at odds with the Lakota perspective that sees the Black Hills as the heart of the people, inseparable from identity and nationhood. Lakota scholars, activists, and spiritual leaders have been clear in stating that the Black Hills are not mysterious in the sense the Labyrinth legends suggest. They are well understood within Lakota knowledge systems, their spiritual significance, their role in history and ceremony, their meaning within the broader landscape. The mysteries that genuinely exist are not about hidden tunnels, but about spiritual truths accessible through proper cultural practice and relationship with the land. The appropriate response to indigenous perspectives on the Labyrinth legends is not to ask native people to verify or debunk the legends, as if their knowledge traditions exist to serve outside investigators' curiosity. The appropriate response is to center indigenous voices in discussions about the Black Hills, to respect their actual traditions rather than appropriating or distorting them to support their land rights and sovereignty, and to recognize that the sacred significance of the hills is not dependent on the existence of ancient labyrinths, but is grounded in real history, culture, and ongoing spiritual practice. Understanding why the Black Hills Labyrinth legends persist despite the absence of supporting evidence requires examining the psychological factors that make stories of hidden underground realms so compelling to human imagination. These factors operate at both individual and cultural levels, creating conditions where belief can flourish independently of empirical verification. At the most fundamental level, underground spaces evoke powerful psychological responses that are likely rooted in our evolutionary history. Caves provided shelter and safety for early humans, serving as protection from predators, harsh weather, and enemies. But caves also represented danger, dark, confining spaces where one could become lost, where predators might lurk, where oxygen could be depleted. This dual nature of underground spaces as both refuge and threat creates an emotional ambivalence that makes them psychologically charged. In many cultures worldwide, the underground is associated with the realm of the dead, with ancestral spirits, or with chthonic deities connected to the earth's depths. This association gives underground spaces a liminal quality. They are thresholds between the ordinary world and other realms, whether these are conceived as the afterlife, the spirit world, or simply the unknown. Entering a cave or tunnel is thus not merely a physical act, but carries symbolic weight as a journey into mystery, into the unconscious, or into forbidden knowledge. The labyrinth itself, whether underground or above ground, has deep symbolic resonance in human culture. From the mythical labyrinth of Crete that housed the Minotaur to the labyrinth designs in medieval cathedrals used for contemplative walking, the image of the labyrinth represents complexity, challenge, the journey to a center or goal, and the possibility of becoming lost. An underground labyrinth combines these symbolic dimensions with the psychological power of the subterranean, creating a particularly potent image. Stories of hidden underground realms also satisfy a fundamental human desire for mystery and discovery in a world that can seem completely mapped and explained. In an age where satellite imagery shows us the entire surface of the Earth, where few places remain unexplored, the underground represents one of the last frontiers where significant discoveries might still be made. The possibility that vast chambers and passages exist beneath our feet, unknown to science, preserves a sense that the world still contains secrets. This desire for mystery is particularly acute in modernity, where many people feel that rationalism and technology have disenchanted the world, stripped it of magic and wonder. Stories of ancient labyrinths, lost civilizations, and suppressed discoveries re-enchant the landscape, suggesting that beneath the familiar surface lies a hidden world of marvel and significance. For those who find purely materialist worldviews unsatisfying, such stories provide an alternative narrative where mystery, ancient wisdom, and hidden knowledge remain accessible. The appeal of being an insider with special knowledge also plays a role. Believing in the Black Hills Labyrinth positions the believer as someone who knows something that mainstream authorities deny or cannot see. This creates a flattering self-concept. One is not a gullible fool, but a discerning individual who can perceive truths that others miss. This psychological reward can sustain belief even in the absence of evidence, because abandoning the belief would mean losing this identity and the satisfying feeling of possessing hidden knowledge. The labyrinth legends also tap into narratives about ancient wisdom and lost civilizations that have deep cultural roots. The idea that ancient peoples possessed knowledge or capabilities that have been lost appeals to a sense that modernity, for all its technological advancement, may have lost something important. The tunnels become repositories not just of physical artifacts, but of ancient wisdom about living in harmony with the earth, about spiritual truths, or about technologies that modern science has not rediscovered. For some believers, the labyrinth legends connect to broader alternative history frameworks that challenge what they see as the arrogance and limitations of mainstream academia. These frameworks propose that human history is far longer and more complex than conventional archaeology acknowledges. That advanced civilizations rose and fell in the deep past, and that evidence of these civilizations is either being actively suppressed or is simply ignored by scholars too committed to existing paradigms to recognize it when they encounter it. This anti-establishment stance is psychologically satisfying for individuals who distrust authority or who feel marginalized by mainstream institutions. The labyrinth legends become part of a larger narrative about truth-tellers challenging corrupt or blind authorities, about the brave independent investigator against the hidebound academic establishment. This narrative casts belief as an act of intellectual courage rather than as acceptance of unsupported claims. The social dimension of belief is also significant. Communities form around shared belief in mysteries like the Black Hills Labyrinth. These communities provide friendship, shared purpose, and validation. For individuals who may feel isolated in their beliefs or interests in mainstream society, finding a community of fellow believers can be powerfully rewarding. The social benefits of belonging to such a community can sustain belief even when individuals privately have doubts, because expressing skepticism risks social rejection and loss of community. Moreover, many believers have made significant investments of time, money, and identity in the Labyrinth legends. They have spent years researching the claims, perhaps traveled to South Dakota to search for tunnel entrances, purchased books and materials about the mystery, and built their self-concept around being someone who pursues hidden truths. Admitting that the legends are false would require abandoning these investments and restructuring one's identity, a psychologically costly process that most people resist. The phenomenon of cognitive dissonance reduction ensures that when believers encounter contrary evidence, they are motivated to reinterpret it in ways that preserve their beliefs rather than revising them. The absence of evidence is reframed as evidence of cover-up. Expert testimony debunking the legends is dismissed as the experts being either ignorant or complicit in suppression. Failed searches for tunnels are explained as having looked in the wrong places or as the tunnels having been sealed since earlier discoveries. Each piece of contrary evidence, rather than challenging belief, is incorporated into an expanding explanatory framework that preserves the core claim. The availability heuristic also plays a role. People tend to judge the likelihood of something being true based on how easily examples come to mind. Because stories about the Black Hills Labyrinth are readily available in books, websites, and local folklore, and because these stories are often vivid and memorable, they can seem more plausible than they warrant. The absence of the labyrinth in scientific literature is less psychologically salient than its presence in alternative sources, leading to an overestimation of the evidence supporting the claims. Confirmation bias ensures that believers notice and remember information that supports their beliefs while dismissing or forgetting information that contradicts them. A believer visiting the Black Hills might notice a cave entrance or an unusual geological feature and interpret it as possible evidence of the labyrinth, while ignoring the hundreds of ordinary features that have no connection to the legend. Over time, this selective attention creates a subjective sense that evidence is everywhere, when in fact it is being created through biased interpretation of ordinary phenomena. Understanding these psychological factors does not make believers irrational or unintelligent. These are normal human cognitive processes that affect everyone to varying degrees. The difference is not in being subject to these biases, we all are, but in the degree to which we recognize and compensate for them through critical thinking, attention to evidence, and willingness to revise beliefs when evidence contradicts them. The Black Hills Labyrinth legends have been sustained and amplified by various media and commercial interests that benefit from the story's continued circulation. Understanding these dynamics reveals how mystery narratives persist and spread even when they lack factual foundation. Books have been among the primary vehicles for spreading the labyrinth legends. Since the mid-20th century, numerous books about ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, and suppressed discoveries have featured chapters or sections on the Black Hills. These books range from relatively sober works attempting to document anomalous archaeological claims to sensationalistic volumes that make extraordinary assertions with minimal supporting evidence. The publishing industry, particularly the segment focused on alternative history and ancient mysteries, has economic incentives to produce books about topics like the Black Hills Labyrinth. These books sell to an established audience interested in such material. They require less rigorous fact-checking than academic works because they are not subject to peer review, and they can be produced relatively quickly by compiling existing claims and adding new speculation or interpretation. Many books about the Black Hills Labyrinth follow a familiar pattern. They present the claims as established or highly probable. They cite earlier books and articles that made similar claims, as if repetition constitutes evidence. They include anecdotal accounts from individuals claiming to have seen tunnels or artifacts. And they suggest that mainstream archaeology is either ignorant of or suppressing the evidence. Critical examination of the claims, presentation of contrary evidence, or acknowledgement of the speculative nature of the assertions is typically minimal or absent. The internet has dramatically amplified the spread of labyrinth legends. Websites, forums, and social media platforms allow anyone to publish claims about hidden tunnels without the gatekeeping that traditional publishing involves. The result is a proliferation of content about the Black Hills Labyrinth that varies wildly in quality, from relatively careful attempts to compile historical references to completely fabricated accounts presented as fact. Internet platforms also create echo chambers where believers primarily encounter other believers, and where claims are repeated and elaborated without critical examination. Someone curious about the Black Hills might search online and encounter dozens of websites presenting the labyrinth legends as real or likely, with far fewer sources offering critical analysis. The sheer volume of content asserting the tunnel's existence can create an impression of evidential support that is illusory. YouTube and other video platforms host numerous videos about the Black Hills Labyrinth, many with dramatic titles and thumbnail images designed to maximize views. These videos often present the legends using techniques borrowed from documentary filmmaking: dramatic narration, ominous music, historical photographs, and computer graphics depicting what the tunnels might look like, creating an impression of authority and credibility that is not warranted by the actual evidence presented. The economics of online content creation incentivize mystery mongering. Videos about mysteries, conspiracies, and anomalous phenomena generate views and engagement, which translate to advertising revenue and channel growth. Content creators thus have financial motivation to present mysteries as unsolved and to avoid definitive debunking, even if they privately recognize that the claims are unlikely to be true. The algorithm-driven recommendation systems of platforms like YouTube tend to lead viewers from one mystery video to another, creating rabbit holes of increasingly speculative content. Tourism and commercial interests in the Black Hills also play a role in perpetuating the legends. While the major tourist attractions like Mount Rushmore and the Crazy Horse Memorial have no connection to the labyrinth legends, smaller businesses have found that the mysteries can attract visitors. Gift shops sell books about the tunnels and maps supposedly showing entrance locations. Tour guides offer excursions to supposedly significant sites associated with the legends. Hotels and restaurants in small towns invoke the mystery as part of the region's appeal. The town of Keystone, South Dakota, for instance, has leaned into various Black Hills mysteries as part of its tourist marketing, alongside its proximity to Mount Rushmore. Several small museums and attractions in Black Hills communities include displays or exhibits about the Labyrinth legends, presenting them with varying degrees of credulity. These commercial uses of the legends create economic incentives for keeping the stories alive and for avoiding too critical an examination that might deflate the mystery's appeal. Even some legitimate educational institutions and media outlets have contributed to perpetuating the legends through inadequately critical coverage. Local newspapers occasionally run human interest stories about treasure hunters or amateur archaeologists searching for the tunnels, often presenting the legends as charming local folklore without critically examining the claims. Television programs about mysteries and unexplained phenomena have featured the Black Hills Labyrinth in episodes that prioritize entertainment value over factual accuracy. The cumulative effect of this media and commercial ecosystem is to create a feedback loop where the legends are constantly reinforced. Someone hears about the Black Hills Labyrinth from a book or video, searches online for more information, finds numerous sources repeating and elaborating the claims, perhaps visits the Black Hills, where they encounter commercial uses of the legend and returns home, convinced that where there is so much smoke, there must be fire. The volume and ubiquity of the claims create an impression of evidential support that is actually just repetition and elaboration of the same unsupported assertions. Breaking this cycle requires critical media literacy, the ability to distinguish between sources of varying reliability, to recognize when claims are being repeated rather than independently verified, and to understand the commercial and ideological motivations that can lead to the promotion of dubious claims. It also requires that responsible media outlets and educational institutions take seriously their role in providing accurate information and critical analysis, even when debunking mysteries is less entertaining than promoting them. While we have seen that the Labyrinth legends are not supported by evidence, the Black Hills do contain genuine mysteries and historical questions that deserve serious investigation and public attention. Shifting focus from invented labyrinths to actual history reveals a landscape at least as interesting and far more significant than the legends suggest. The geological history of the Black Hills remains an active area of research with unresolved questions. While the basic story of the uplift and erosion is understood, details about the timing and mechanisms of various geological events continue to be refined through ongoing study. The region's mineral deposits, including the gold that sparked the 19th century rush, form through complex processes that are still being elucidated. The hydrology of the cave systems, including how water flows through the limestone formations and how the various caves might be interconnected hydrologically, if not physically, is incompletely understood. The Wind Cave and Jewel Cave systems, rather than being fully mapped mysteries whose secrets are being suppressed, are ongoing frontiers of exploration where new discoveries are made regularly. Cave explorers continue to push into unmapped passages, document new formations and features, and expand human knowledge of these remarkable natural systems. This genuine exploration is more exciting and more scientifically valuable than chasing imaginary ancient labyrinths. The region's paleontological record also offers real mysteries. Fossils found in the Black Hills sedimentary layers provide windows into ancient ecosystems spanning hundreds of millions of years. The region has yielded significant fossil discoveries, including early mammals, dinosaurs, and marine organisms from when the area was covered by shallow seas. Understanding the full paleontological record and what it reveals about evolutionary history and past environments is ongoing work. The archaeological record of actual indigenous occupation of the Black Hills is far richer and more interesting than often acknowledged. While major excavations have been limited in part because much of the land is protected as national forest or park, the archaeological evidence that has been documented shows intensive use of the region spanning thousands of years. Lithic scatters showing where people manufactured stone tools, rock art sites with pictographs and petroglyphs, tipi rings marking encampment locations, and evidence of plant processing and hunting all demonstrate sophisticated knowledge of and adaptation to the Black Hills environment. Particularly significant are the ceremonial and vision quest sites scattered throughout the hills. These locations, many of which are protected, and their precise locations not publicized to prevent looting and vandalism, show how the landscape was integrated into spiritual practices. Studying these sites, with appropriate indigenous consultation and permission, can reveal information about pre-contact religious practices, about how different groups used the same landscape, and about the continuity between pre-contact traditions and contemporary indigenous spiritual practices. The historical archaeology of the Gold Rush era and subsequent Euro-American settlement also offers important research opportunities. The rapid transformation of the Black Hills from Lakota territory to mining frontier to modern tourist destination left material traces whose systematic study can reveal information about frontier economics, environmental impacts of mining, intercultural conflict and cooperation, and the development of Western American identity. The legal and political history of the Black Hills, particularly the theft of the land in violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty and the ongoing Lakota struggle for its return, raises profound questions about justice, treaty rights, and the relationship between the United States and indigenous nations. This history is not mysterious in the sense of being unknown. It is well documented, but it raises moral and legal questions that remain unresolved and that deserve far more attention than invented tunnel legends receive. The environmental history of the region, including how both indigenous and later populations have affected the landscape, offers lessons for current land management and conservation. Understanding how fire regimes have changed since the suppression of indigenous burning practices, how mining and logging have affected hydrology and ecology, and how contemporary management strategies might better serve both ecological health and cultural values, requires ongoing research. The Black Hills biodiversity, including species assemblages that occur nowhere else and isolated populations of species whose main ranges are far distant, raises biogeographical questions about how these populations arrived, how they persist in isolation, and how climate change might affect them. The region is home to unique plant communities, provides habitat for species including mountain lions and black bears, and contains populations of prairie species in its grassland fringe and forest species in its wooded interior. All of these genuine research areas offer opportunities for meaningful discovery, for expanding human knowledge, and for addressing questions that have real implications for how we understand the natural world, human history, and the relationships between peoples and landscapes. They deserve the attention, resources, and enthusiasm that are too often diverted to pursuing imaginary labyrinths. The Black Hills Labyrinth legends provide an excellent case study for developing and practicing critical thinking skills that are valuable far beyond this specific example. Learning to evaluate extraordinary claims systematically can help us navigate a world full of dubious assertions, conspiracy theories, and pseudoscientific beliefs. The first and most fundamental principle is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This does not mean we should never believe anything surprising or unusual, but rather that the more dramatically a claim departs from established knowledge, the stronger the evidence must be before we accept it. The claim that extensive artificial tunnels exist beneath the Black Hills, carved by ancient peoples and subsequently lost or suppressed, is extraordinary. It contradicts what geologists know about the region's structure, what archaeologists know about Precambrian capabilities and activities, and what historians know about the region's exploration and settlement. For such an extraordinary claim, we should demand correspondingly extraordinary evidence, not just anecdotes and speculation, but physical artifacts, documented and replicable observations, and findings that can be independently verified by qualified experts. The absence of such evidence, despite over a century of active searching by believers, is powerful reason to reject the claim. The second principle is to consider the source and look for independent corroboration. Where do claims about the Black Hills Labyrinth come from? Are they from qualified experts with relevant training who have published their findings in peer-reviewed journals? Or are they from amateur researchers, treasure hunters, and alternative history enthusiasts publishing in venues that do not employ rigorous fact-checking? When multiple sources make similar claims, we should ask whether they are truly independent or whether they are all drawing on the same earlier source, simply repeating and elaborating each other's claims. Much of the literature about the Black Hills Labyrinth consists of later authors citing earlier authors, creating an impression of multiple confirmations when actually all the claims trace back to the same unverified original assertions. The third principle is to understand the difference between absence of evidence and evidence of absence. In some cases, absence of evidence is not particularly meaningful. If something is difficult to detect, or if searching has been limited, we cannot conclude from not finding it that it does not exist. But when extensive searching by qualified investigators using appropriate methods has failed to produce evidence, and when the thing being sought would produce evidence that should be detectable, absence of evidence becomes strong evidence of absence. The Black Hills have been intensively explored by geologists, cave surveyors, miners, hikers, and treasure hunters for over a century. If vast artificial tunnel systems existed, this exploration should have produced clear evidence of them. The fact that it has not is significant. The fourth principle is to consider alternative explanations and apply Occam's razor, the idea that when multiple explanations could account for observations, the simplest explanation requiring the fewest unsupported assumptions is most likely correct. The Labyrinth legends require us to believe that ancient peoples carved extensive tunnels through difficult geology, that these tunnels were subsequently lost or forgotten despite their size, and that evidence of them is being suppressed by various authorities who have maintained perfect secrecy across generations. The alternative explanation, that the legends are folklore based on misidentification of natural caves, embellishment of ordinary mine workings, and the human tendency to imagine mysteries where none exist, requires far fewer unsupported assumptions and is consistent with what we know about how folklore develops and spreads. The fifth principle is to be aware of cognitive biases and to actively work to compensate for them. Confirmation bias, the availability heuristic, pattern-seeking tendencies, and other cognitive shortcuts can lead us astray. Being aware of these tendencies and deliberately seeking out information that challenges our beliefs, considering contrary evidence seriously, and being willing to change our minds when evidence warrants is essential for arriving at accurate beliefs. The sixth principle is to understand that personal testimony and anecdotal evidence, while sometimes valuable, are among the weakest forms of evidence. People misperceive, misremember, exaggerate, and sometimes deliberately deceive. Even honest witnesses can be mistaken. The plural of anecdote is not data. Multiple unverified stories do not add up to proof, especially when the stories cannot be independently confirmed and when we know that such stories spread and evolve through retelling. The seventh principle is to recognize motivated reasoning and conflicts of interest. When evaluating claims, we should ask whether those making the claims have financial, ideological, or psychological motivations that might lead them to present information selectively or to make claims that are not fully supported. Treasure hunters have obvious financial motivations to promote legends of hidden wealth. Alternative history authors have commercial interests in selling books about mysteries. Individuals who have invested years in pursuing the labyrinth have psychological investments in believing it exists. These conflicts of interest do not automatically mean the claims are false, but they do mean we should be more rather than less critical in our evaluation, and we should demand stronger evidence before accepting claims from sources with clear motivations beyond disinterested pursuit of truth. Finally, we should understand that science is a self-correcting process, but that pseudoscience is not. Legitimate scientific claims can be tested, can be revised when new evidence emerges, and are subject to peer review and replication. Pseudoscientific claims, like the Black Hills Labyrinth legends, evolved to avoid falsification, are not subject to rigorous peer review, and are immune to contrary evidence because believers reinterpret all observations to support their pre-existing beliefs. Applying these critical thinking principles to the Black Hills Labyrinth legends leads to clear conclusions. The claims are not supported by credible evidence. The alternative explanations are more plausible, and belief is sustained primarily through psychological and social factors rather than through rational evaluation of evidence. Beyond the question of whether ancient labyrinths exist beneath the Black Hills, the legends have real-world impacts on environmental conservation and cultural preservation that deserve consideration. The pursuit of imaginary tunnels can cause tangible harm to the landscape and to the sites that actually do hold historical and cultural significance. The environmental impacts of treasure hunting and amateur archaeology motivated by the labyrinth legends include soil disturbance from digging, erosion caused by off-trail hiking in sensitive areas, damage to cave formations when inexperienced explorers enter fragile cave systems, and littering of remote areas with equipment and waste from investigation attempts. While any single incident of such impact might be minor, the cumulative effect of decades of such activity across the Black Hills can be significant. Cave systems are particularly vulnerable to damage from inappropriate visitation. Cave formations like stalactites, stalagmites, and the rare boxwork formations in Wind Cave grow extraordinarily slowly. A column might take tens of thousands of years to form. When visitors touch these formations, the oils from human skin inhibit further growth. When formations are broken for souvenirs, which has occurred despite legal protections, the damage is essentially permanent on human timescales. When people enter unmapped or restricted portions of caves without proper training and equipment, they risk becoming lost or injured, and rescue operations can cause additional damage. The Black Hills also contain sensitive surface ecosystems that are damaged by off-trail traffic. Alpine meadows, wetlands, and riparian areas are particularly fragile. When treasure hunters or labyrinth seekers bushwhack through these areas searching for tunnel entrances, they trample vegetation, compact soil, create informal trails that channel erosion, and disturb wildlife. Over time, these impacts can alter plant community composition and affect the wildlife that depends on intact habitats. Archaeological sites that actually do exist, indigenous lithic scatters, tipi rings, rock art panels, and historical mining structures, are sometimes damaged by those searching for imaginary ancient labyrinths. When amateur archaeologists dig without proper methodology or remove artifacts without documentation, they destroy the contextual information that makes sites scientifically valuable. A stone tool removed from its stratigraphic context becomes merely an interesting object rather than a data point in understanding past human behavior. Federal and state laws protect archaeological sites and cultural resources, making it illegal to dig, remove artifacts, or damage such sites without proper permits. But enforcement is limited in the vast, remote areas of the Black Hills, and violations occur regularly. The damage is often discovered only after the fact, when it is too late to preserve the information that has been destroyed. The National Park Service, Forest Service, and state agencies tasked with managing Black Hills lands face ongoing challenges in balancing public access with resource protection. They must prevent illegal digging and vandalism while still allowing legitimate recreation and research. The Labyrinth legends complicate this task by creating persistent demand from individuals who want to search for tunnels and who may view legal restrictions as evidence of conspiracy rather than as reasonable resource protection. From a cultural preservation standpoint, the focus on invented labyrinths diverts attention and resources from the preservation and interpretation of actual historical and cultural sites. The Black Hills contain rich historical resources, including indigenous sacred sites, Gold Rush-era structures and landscapes, early 20th century tourism developments, and landscapes shaped by forestry and ranching. These actual resources tell important stories about human interaction with this landscape and deserve preservation and public interpretation. But funding and attention are limited resources. When public interest focuses on hunting for imaginary ancient tunnels, there is less support for the often unglamorous work of preserving and interpreting actual history. When tourists come seeking mysterious labyrinths rather than learning about real Lakota history or gold rush archaeology, opportunities for meaningful education are lost. Indigenous cultural preservation is particularly affected by the labyrinth legends and the activities they inspire. Sacred sites are disturbed by treasure hunters and amateur archaeologists who lack understanding of or respect for their significance. Traditional knowledge about the landscape and its cultural geography is appropriated and distorted when non-indigenous people reinterpret indigenous spiritual concepts as evidence of ancient labyrinths. The ongoing Lakota struggle for the return of the Black Hills is obscured when the region is framed primarily as a location of ancient mysteries rather than a stolen indigenous homeland. Responsible engagement with the Black Hills requires prioritizing actual environmental and cultural preservation over the pursuit of invented mysteries. It means staying on established trails, respecting closures and restrictions, leaving artifacts and features undisturbed, and directing our curiosity and enthusiasm toward learning about the landscape's real natural and cultural history rather than imagining alternatives unsupported by evidence. As we approach the conclusion of this investigation into the Black Hills Labyrinth legends, we must address a fundamental question. Does it matter whether the legends are true? If people find meaning, community, and inspiration in believing that ancient tunnels exist beneath the Black Hills, is there harm in allowing or even encouraging such beliefs? Why should we insist on truth when fiction might be more satisfying? These questions touch on deep issues in epistemology, ethics, and the philosophy of belief. Different philosophical traditions offer different answers. Pragmatists might argue that beliefs should be judged by their practical consequences rather than by their correspondence to reality. If believing in the labyrinth makes someone's life richer or happier, then it is a valuable belief regardless of its factual status. Postmodernists might question whether there is even a meaningful distinction between true and false narratives, suggesting that all stories are constructions and that insisting on one version as objectively true is a form of cultural imperialism. But there are compelling reasons to value truth over comforting fiction, reasons that become clear when we examine the actual consequences of false beliefs and the hidden costs of living in narratives disconnected from reality. First, false beliefs about the Black Hills specifically cause tangible harms that we have documented throughout this investigation. They lead to environmental damage when treasure hunters and amateur archaeologists dig in sensitive areas. They cause cultural harm when indigenous traditions are appropriated and distorted. They waste resources when time, money, and attention that could address real issues are diverted to pursuing imaginary tunnels. They enable financial exploitation when dubious books, tours, and services are sold to those seeking access to non-existent labyrinths. These are not abstract philosophical costs, but real harms affecting real landscapes and real communities. The environmental damage to fragile cave systems and sensitive ecosystems is permanent on human timescales. The cultural appropriation contributes to the ongoing marginalization and erasure of indigenous peoples. The misdirection of attention and resources means that genuine historical and environmental needs go unmet. Second, false beliefs foster habits of mind that harm the believer's ability to navigate other aspects of life effectively. When someone learns to accept claims without evidence, to dismiss contrary evidence through conspiracy theories, to prefer exciting narratives over careful analysis, these patterns of thinking carry over to other domains. The person who uncritically accepts the Black Hills Labyrinth legends may also accept medical quackery, financial scams, political propaganda, or other false claims that can cause serious harm. Critical thinking is not a specialized skill useful only in academic contexts, but a fundamental life competence. Learning to evaluate evidence, to distinguish reliable from unreliable sources, to recognize when our biases are leading us astray, and to proportion belief to evidence helps us make better decisions about health, finances, relationships, and civic participation. Conversely, habits of uncritical acceptance and motivated reasoning leave us vulnerable to exploitation and poor decision-making. Third, living in narratives disconnected from reality ultimately proves unsatisfying because reality has a way of asserting itself. The treasure hunter who spends years and resources searching for tunnels that do not exist will eventually face the disappointment of never finding them. The spiritual seeker who believes ancient wisdom is preserved in underground chambers that are actually non-existent will not gain the insights they seek from that source, though they might gain them from other, real sources if they are willing to look. The disappointment and disillusionment that can follow sustained belief in false narratives can be profound. Some believers double down, becoming ever more convinced that the evidence is being suppressed or that they simply have not looked in the right place. But others eventually recognize they have been chasing phantoms, and the loss of belief can be painful, especially when it requires acknowledging years of wasted effort and the dissolution of communities built around shared false beliefs. Fourth, there is a moral dimension to truth-telling that we should not dismiss. When we know that claims are false or unsupported, but we nonetheless promote them or fail to challenge them because the truth is less exciting or less profitable, we are being dishonest. We are misleading others, violating their trust, and treating them as means to our ends rather than as individuals deserving of respect and truth. This is particularly acute when the false claims involve other people's cultures and sacred sites. When non-indigenous people promote legends about the Black Hills that appropriate and distort Lakota traditions, they are being dishonest about indigenous culture while profiting from or enjoying the appropriated narratives. When businesses promote labyrinth legends to attract tourists, knowing the legends are unsupported, they are engaging in a form of fraud even if they couch their claims in ambiguous language. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, reality is sufficient. The actual Black Hills, understood through geology, ecology, archaeology, and indigenous tradition, are remarkable enough to inspire awe, wonder, and deep engagement without requiring embellishment through invented labyrinths. The real geological history spanning over 1 billion years, the genuine cave systems extending hundreds of miles through limestone. The actual indigenous presence and cultural traditions spanning thousands of years, the authentic historical events, including both tragedy and resilience. All of this is more than enough to make the Black Hills a landscape of profound significance. Choosing truth over comforting fiction is not a choice to embrace a diminished or disenchanted world. It is a choice to engage with reality in all its complexity and genuine wonder, rather than retreating into fantasies that ultimately cannot satisfy because they are not real. The Black Hills do not need ancient labyrinths to be sacred. Their actual existence is marvel enough. The persistence of the Black Hills labyrinth legends, despite their lack of evidentiary support, tells us something significant about American culture, about how Americans relate to landscape and history, and about the narratives we find compelling even when they are not true. The legends participate in a long American tradition of frontier mythology, stories about hidden wealth, lost mines, and secret knowledge waiting to be discovered in the wilderness. From the 7 cities of Cibola to the Lost Dutchman mine, from Oak Island to Forest Fen's treasure, American culture has been fascinated by legends of riches hidden in the landscape, waiting for the bold or clever individual to claim them. This fascination reflects deep currents in American identity and ideology. The narrative of the individual discovering hidden treasure and achieving sudden wealth is a version of the American dream, the idea that through individual effort, cleverness, and perhaps some luck, anyone can rise from modest circumstances to fortune. The treasure hunter searching for lost gold or ancient artifacts is a folk hero, embodying values of independence, persistence, and self-reliance. But these frontier treasure narratives also have a darker dimension. They often involve lands taken from indigenous peoples, and the search for hidden wealth becomes a way of justifying or obscuring that dispossession. If the landscape contains treasures left by lost civilizations or hidden by Spanish explorers, then the current indigenous inhabitants are positioned as merely the latest, in a succession of populations, with no special claim to the land. The search for ancient labyrinths or lost mines becomes a way of relating to landscape that does not require acknowledging indigenous sovereignty or the theft of indigenous land. The Black Hills Labyrinth legends specifically emerge from and contribute to this pattern. By focusing attention on hypothetical ancient tunnel builders, the legends divert attention from the Lakota people who have actual, well-documented historical and sacred relationships with the Black Hills. By suggesting that the real mysteries of the hills lie in hidden passages rather than in living indigenous culture and ongoing struggles for justice, the legends participate in indigenous erasure. The legends also reflect characteristically American attitudes toward wilderness and the frontier. Even as the literal frontier closed in the late 19th century, Americans have continued to seek frontiers, spaces of adventure, discovery, and transformation. Underground spaces represent a final frontier, a realm that remains largely unexplored and that could still contain secrets and wonders. The Labyrinth legends preserve this frontier mythology in an era when the surface landscape has been thoroughly mapped and settled. There is also an element of anti-establishment populism in the Labyrinth legends and the conspiracy theories that often accompany them. The narrative that government agencies or academic institutions are suppressing evidence of the tunnel's appeals to those who distrust authority and who see themselves as independent truth seekers, challenging corrupt or incompetent establishments. This narrative is deeply American, drawing on traditions of resistance to centralized power and celebration of the individual against the system. But this anti-establishment stance, while it can sometimes serve valuable purposes in challenging genuine abuses of power, can also lead to rejection of legitimate expertise and to embrace of conspiracy thinking that sees cover-ups and suppression everywhere. When distrust of authority extends to rejection of scientific consensus, archaeological evidence, and expert testimony simply because they come from established institutions, the result is an epistemological crisis where belief becomes disconnected from evidence. The Labyrinth legends also reveal American ambivalence about indigenous peoples and their histories. There is fascination with Native American spirituality and culture, evidenced by the popularity of books, workshops, and spiritual practices that claim indigenous origin or inspiration. But this fascination often comes without genuine engagement with actual indigenous peoples, their contemporary lives, their political struggles, or their own understandings of their traditions. Instead, indigenous culture is appropriated, romanticized, and incorporated into non-indigenous spiritual seeking in ways that indigenous peoples themselves often find offensive and harmful. The Black Hills Labyrinth legends exemplify this pattern. They appropriate elements of Lakota tradition, the sacred significance of the hills, the spiritual understanding of wind, cave as emergent site, but transform them into claims about ancient labyrinths that align with non-indigenous cultural interests. The result is a form of engagement with the Black Hills that centers non-indigenous fantasies while marginalizing actual Lakota presence and perspectives. Understanding what the Labyrinth legends reveal about American culture does not require accepting them as true. Rather, it means recognizing them as cultural productions that tell us about the values, anxieties, and desires of the society that generates and maintains them. The legends are interesting not as potential archaeological facts, but as American mythology, revealing how we think about landscape, history, indigenous peoples, and our own place in the story. If the Labyrinth legends are false and harmful, what would responsible engagement with the Black Hills look like? How can we honor this remarkable landscape, respect the peoples for whom it is sacred, and satisfy our human desires for meaning and connection without retreating into unsupported fantasies? Responsible engagement begins with commitment to truth, to grounding our beliefs about the Black Hills in evidence rather than wishful thinking, to seeking accurate information about the region's geology, ecology, and history, and to being willing to revise our beliefs when evidence contradicts them. This does not mean we must become experts in every relevant field, but it does mean consulting reliable sources, being appropriately skeptical of extraordinary claims, and understanding the difference between established knowledge and speculation. It means centering indigenous voices and perspectives. The Black Hills are Lakota homeland, sacred territory that was stolen in violation of treaties, and that remains at the center of ongoing struggles for justice and sovereignty. Any engagement with the Black Hills that does not acknowledge this history, that does not listen to Lakota perspectives, and that does not support the return of the land to indigenous control is fundamentally incomplete and disrespectful. Centering indigenous voices means several specific things. It means reading and learning from indigenous authors and scholars rather than relying on non-indigenous interpreters. It means supporting indigenous cultural institutions and educational programs. It means respecting indigenous protocols around sacred sites, including accepting when certain places are not appropriate for non-indigenous access. It means supporting the Lakota demand for the return of the Black Hills, recognizing that financial compensation is not acceptable when what was stolen was land itself. It means advocating for policies and practices that respect indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights, that include indigenous peoples as full partners in land management decisions, and that return control of cultural resources and sacred sites to indigenous communities. This is not charity, but justice, recognizing that the current situation where indigenous peoples have minimal control over their most sacred landscape is the result of theft and ongoing injustice. Responsible engagement also means appreciating the Black Hills for what they actually are rather than for what we imagine them to be. The geological history of the hills, from the formation of Precambrian granite over 1 billion years ago through successive depositions, uplift, and erosion, is genuinely awe-inspiring when understood in detail. Learning about plate tectonics, mountain building processes, and the patient work of erosion over millions of years provides intellectual satisfaction and deepens appreciation for the landscape. The ecology of the Black Hills, where Great Plains grasslands meet rocky mountain forests, creating unique assemblages of species and habitats found nowhere else, rewards careful attention and study. Learning to identify the plants and animals of the region, understanding the seasonal rhythms and ecological relationships, and appreciating the biodiversity that the hills support enhances the experience of being in the landscape far more than searching for imaginary tunnels. The actual cave systems of the Black Hills, Wind Cave, Jewel Cave, and smaller caves throughout the region, are remarkable natural wonders that have been genuinely underexplored and that offer real opportunities for discovery. Supporting cave conservation efforts, learning about speleology, and if appropriately trained and permitted, participating in cave exploration provide authentic experiences of discovery and wonder without requiring belief in ancient artificial labyrinths. The human history of the Black Hills, both indigenous and more recent, is rich and significant. Learning about the thousands of years of Lakota and other indigenous peoples, presence about the complex cultural traditions and sophisticated knowledge systems about the gold rush and its impacts, about the political and legal history of the hills' theft and the ongoing struggle for their return. All of this provides context and meaning that invented mysteries cannot match. Responsible engagement means being a good visitor if we travel to the Black Hills. It means staying on established trails to prevent erosion and protect sensitive habitats. It means leaving no trace of our presence, packing out all waste. It means respecting closures and restrictions rather than viewing them as evidence of conspiracy. It means visiting with humility and openness to learning rather than with the extractive attitude that seeks to take experiences, photographs, or artifacts without giving anything in return. It means supporting conservation efforts and the organizations working to protect the natural and cultural resources of the region. It means supporting indigenous-led initiatives, including land return efforts, cultural preservation programs, and educational projects. It means being conscious of where our tourist dollars go and choosing to support businesses and organizations that operate ethically and that contribute to genuine preservation and justice. Finally, responsible engagement means being willing to find meaning and spiritual connection in truth rather than requiring false narratives. The Black Hills can be experienced as sacred without believing in ancient labyrinths. The experience of standing in an ancient forest, of seeing the stars from a high peak, of understanding deep geological time, of contemplating the persistence of indigenous presence despite generations of violence and dispossession. These experiences can provide the sense of connection, transcendence, and meaning that human beings seek. We do not need lies to have meaningful experiences. We do not need to believe unsupported claims to feel awe and wonder. The truth, engaged with deeply and honestly, is sufficient and ultimately more satisfying than any fantasy. Throughout this investigation, we have focused primarily on what the Black Hills are not. They do not contain ancient artificial labyrinths. Lost civilizations did not carve tunnels beneath them, and the legends claiming otherwise are unsupported by evidence. But in concluding, we should turn our attention to what the Black Hills actually are, because their genuine characteristics are more remarkable than any invented mystery. The Black Hills are an ancient uplift exposing some of the oldest rock on the North American continent. The granite core dates back over 18 billion years, formed when Earth was a profoundly different planet, when the atmosphere was just beginning to accumulate oxygen from photosynthetic organisms, when complex life had not yet evolved beyond single-celled forms. To touch this granite is to touch stone that has existed for more than 1/3 of Earth's total history. The sedimentary layers surrounding the granite core contain their own stories, written in stone. Limestone formed from the compressed remains of countless marine organisms that lived in the shallow seas that covered the region hundreds of millions of years ago. Sandstone preserves ancient beaches and riverbeds. Shale contains fossils of organisms long extinct, species that inhabited worlds so different from our own that they seem almost alien. The uplift that created the modern Black Hills began some 60 to 70 million years ago, during the age of dinosaurs' end and the mammals' rise. Over tens of millions of years, the dome rose while erosion stripped away the overlying layers, exposing progressively older rock in the center, while creating the concentric rings visible on geological maps. This process continues today at rates measured in millimeters per year, patient transformation on time scales that humble human comprehension. The cave systems of the Black Hills represent some of the most extensive and complex natural underground passages in the world. Wind Cave and Jewel Cave together contain over 350 miles of mapped passages, and exploration continues to reveal new sections. These caves formed through the dissolution of limestone by slightly acidic groundwater over millions of years, creating intricate networks of passages, chambers, and formations. Wind Cave is particularly remarkable for its boxwork formations, thin calcite fins that create honeycomb patterns on walls and ceilings. These formations, rare in other caves worldwide, formed when calcite crystallized in cracks in the limestone. Then later erosion removed the surrounding rock, leaving the calcite fins protruding. The result is a delicate, lace-like structure that appears almost too perfect to be natural, but which is entirely the product of geological processes. Jewel Cave earns its name from the calcite crystals that line many passages, creating sparkling surfaces when illuminated. The cave also contains other formations including stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone, and draperies, all formed drop by drop over thousands or millions of years as mineral-laden water seeps through the rock and deposits its dissolved minerals. The ecology of the Black Hills represents a unique convergence of biological communities. Species typical of the Rocky Mountains reach their eastern limit in the Black Hills, while Great Plains species reach their western edge. The result is an assemblage found nowhere else, with species from different biomes interacting in ways that create ecological complexity. Ponderosa pine forests cover much of the hills, their distinctive cinnamon-colored bark and long needles creating the characteristic appearance of the region. But the forests also include white spruce, quaking aspen, and paper birch at higher elevations, creating habitat for species including mountain lions, bobcats, black bears, and a reintroduced population of elk. The grasslands at lower elevations support bison, pronghorn antelope, and prairie dog colonies that themselves support a complex community of predators and scavengers. The Black Hills are also home to species of conservation concern, including the Black Hills red-bellied snake, found only in this region, and isolated populations of species whose main ranges are far distant. These populations represent biogeographical puzzles. How did they arrive in the Black Hills? How have they persisted in isolation? And what might their genetics tell us about past climates and connections between now separated populations? The indigenous cultural history of the Black Hills extends back thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows human presence in and around the hills for at least 10,000 years, with intensive use during various periods. The hills provided resources, game, plants, stone for tools, and water, while their elevation offered views and strategic positions. But beyond practical considerations, the hills held and continue to hold profound spiritual significance. For the Lakota, the Black Hills are the center of the world, the place of emergence, the heart of creation. This is not metaphor, but living spiritual reality, embedded in ceremony, story, and the continuous practice of relationship with the land. The springs, peaks, and forests of the hills are not merely resources, but relatives, entities with whom humans live in relationship, toward whom humans have obligations, and from whom humans receive gifts. This indigenous perspective offers an alternative to both the reductionist view that sees landscape as merely physical resources to be studied and exploited, and the New Age view that projects invented mysteries onto the landscape. It sees the hills as genuinely sacred, not because they contain hidden labyrinths, but because they are, in their very existence and in their role in Lakota history and cosmology, the dwelling place of the sacred. The more recent history of the Black Hills is also significant, though much of it is tragic. The theft of the hills following the discovery of gold represents one of the clearest violations of treaty obligations in American history. The subsequent mining boom transformed the landscape and created the towns and infrastructure that remain today. The carving of Mount Rushmore into the face of the sacred mountain, the Lakota call the Six Grandfathers, represents ongoing desecration, a wound in the landscape that continues to pain indigenous peoples. Yet through all of this, Lakota presence and resistance have persisted. The refusal to accept financial compensation for the theft of the hills, the ongoing legal and political efforts for their return, the maintenance of cultural traditions and spiritual practices despite forced removal and cultural suppression. All of this is part of the hills' living history and significance. The Black Hills, understood in all their geological, ecological, cultural, and political complexity, are more than sufficient to inspire wonder, to reward study, and to evoke the sense of sacred connection that humans seek in powerful landscapes. They do not need ancient labyrinths to be remarkable. Their actual existence, their real history, both geological and human, their ongoing significance to indigenous peoples, and their role in struggles for justice, all of this makes them a landscape of profound importance. As we conclude this comprehensive investigation of the Black Hills Labyrinth legends, we can state clearly and definitively, there is no credible evidence for ancient artificial tunnels beneath the Black Hills. The legends are modern mythology, not historical fact. They are folklore that has grown through the accretion of claims, speculation, and misunderstanding, sustained by psychological needs and commercial interests rather than by evidence. The geological structure of the Black Hills does not support the existence of vast artificial tunnel networks. The extensive natural cave systems that do exist, Wind Cave, Jewel Cave, and others, are well documented, actively explored, and entirely natural in origin. The historical record, when examined critically, does not substantiate stories of mysterious tunnel discoveries. Indigenous traditions about the Black Hills, while acknowledging the sacred significance of underground places, do not describe the elaborate labyrinths that modern legends suggest. Every investigation attempting to verify the labyrinth claims has failed to produce credible physical evidence. The artifacts are always lost or unavailable for examination. The tunnel entrances are always in inaccessible locations or have been conveniently sealed. The supposed suppression of evidence requires conspiracy theories involving countless individuals maintaining perfect secrecy across generations. The pattern is characteristic of pseudo-archaeology and urban legend, not of genuine historical mystery. Yet in establishing what is not true about the Black Hills, we have discovered what is true, and the reality is more remarkable than the fiction. The Black Hills are an ancient geological formation exposing over 1 billion years of Earth's history. They contain some of the longest and most complex natural cave systems in the world. They support unique ecological communities found nowhere else. They have been home to indigenous peoples for thousands of years and remain central to Lakota identity, spirituality, and ongoing struggles for justice. Understanding the truth about the Black Hills requires us to engage with complexity rather than retreat into simple narratives. It requires acknowledging the region's genuine wonders while also confronting the injustice of how the hills were stolen and the ongoing harm of their continued theft. It requires appreciating natural processes operating over geological time scales while also recognizing the importance of human history and cultural meaning. It requires scientific understanding of geology and ecology alongside respect for indigenous knowledge and spiritual traditions. The choice between the labyrinth legends and the reality of the Black Hills is not a choice between mystery and mundane explanation, between wonder and disenchantment. It is a choice between fantasy and reality, between comforting fiction and complex truth. The reality is that the Black Hills contain genuine mysteries, unresolved questions in geology, ecology, archaeology, and history that scientists and scholars continue to investigate. They contain genuine wonders, geological formations, cave systems, and ecological communities that inspire awe in those who understand them. And they contain genuine significance as sacred landscape, as stolen homeland, and a site of ongoing struggle for justice and sovereignty. We can engage with the Black Hills more meaningfully by understanding them as they are rather than as we imagine them to be. We can experience wonder and connection without requiring invented labyrinths. We can find meaning in the actual geological deep time, in the real ecological relationships, in the genuine human history, both ancient and contemporary. We can support justice by advocating for the return of the hills to Lakota control, by respecting indigenous sovereignty, and by working to address historical and ongoing harms. The Labyrinth legends will likely persist despite this investigation and despite the lack of supporting evidence. They serve psychological and cultural functions that have little to do with factual accuracy. They provide community for believers. They offer the excitement of mystery and the flattering identity of insider knowledge, and they generate revenue for those who profit from selling books, tours, and services related to the legends. But for those willing to choose truth over comforting fiction, for those willing to ground belief in evidence rather than wishful thinking, and for those willing to engage with the genuine complexity and significance of the Black Hills, the path is clear. We set aside the invented labyrinths and turn our attention to the actual landscape, ancient, complex, beautiful, sacred, contested, and worthy of our deepest respect and attention. The Black Hills rise from the Great Plains like an island of stone, their forested slopes dark against the surrounding grasslands, their peaks reaching toward the sky. They have stood for hundreds of millions of years, through transformations of climate and life that have reshaped the world multiple times. They have known human presence for at least 10,000 years, providing home and sustenance and spiritual center to generations beyond counting. They have been stolen, scarred, and exploited, yet they endure, and the peoples for whom they are sacred persist in demanding justice. The hills contain no ancient labyrinths, no hidden tunnels carved by lost civilizations, no suppressed evidence of alternative histories. But they contain something more valuable than any invented mystery. They contain truth, the truth of geological processes operating over deep time, the truth of ecological relationships creating unique biodiversity, the truth of indigenous presence, resistance, and persistence, the truth of ongoing injustice and the demand for its correction. This truth is harder than fantasy, more demanding than comfortable fiction, and less immediately exciting than tales of ancient labyrinths. But it is real, and it is sufficient. The Black Hills, understood truly and engaged with honestly, offer all the wonder, meaning, and connection that human beings seek in powerful landscapes. They need no embellishment through invented legends. They need only our attention, our respect, and our commitment to truth and justice. They stand waiting, patient as stone, for us to see them not as we wish them to be, but as they are: ancient, sacred, magnificent, and more than worthy of our deepest reverence and our most serious engagement. The labyrinth we have been seeking does not exist beneath the Black Hills. But perhaps the real labyrinth is the one we must navigate in our own thinking. The challenge of distinguishing truth from fiction, evidence from speculation, genuine respect from appropriation, and meaningful engagement from escapist fantasy. Navigating this labyrinth successfully leads not to hidden chambers beneath the earth, but to clearer understanding, more honest engagement, and more respectful relationship with landscapes, peoples, and truth itself. The journey is difficult, but the destination, a life and worldview grounded in reality rather than fantasy, in justice rather than exploitation, in respect rather than appropriation, is worth every step. The Black Hills, in all their genuine complexity and significance, await those willing to make that journey.